in a bit. But before we begin, I just want to let you know that today's keynote webinar will be recorded, and we also will have time at the end for questions. So if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A pod, and we'll leave time at the end to try to answer as many of those as we can. As I said, this will be recorded, so I believe there'll be a link that you can distribute to others who might have missed this in your organization. But without any further ado, we'll begin. A little bit about me. I am the Vice President of Digital Performance Insights and Load Testing at Keynote. I've been with Keynote 15 years. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, but travel sort of the world to visit our clients. And I also, I guess, believe bald is beautiful. But my passion is really around helping customers optimize their performance on their site, mobile apps. That's really what our team is focused on. That's what I do personally. And it's where sort of my context comes from for this presentation. The idea, I think, of the talk today is to sort of think about how we move along a life cycle from using a Keynote tool or any tool, I guess, that is sort of focused on synthetic measurement and really moving from that to a process that improves your customer's experience. At the end of the day, people will ask me many times, if I buy this tool, will my site be faster? Will my site be better? Will I have more sales? Will there be higher conversions? And the reality is that no tool, including Keynote's tool, does that in and of itself. Tools are simply sort of the starting point to collect data to enable a process. And I think if you were to talk to other folks in the industry, and I'm sure you feel this as well, we're almost in a situation in 2015 where we are overwhelmed with data. And so this slide is sort of a simple graphic, but illustrates to me a very large problem that we find in organizations, and that is that everyone has data, and that data will come from tools like Keynote, of course, but also APM backend tools like New Relic, AppDynamics, Dynatrace, enterprise management tools, CA Unicenter and IBM Tivoli, their own internal, business metrics. And we have all of this data, and we have so much data, we have to develop new ways of storing this data, big data, NoSQL. We have new ways of visualizing the data with these BI tools. But really, at the end of the day, the question is this data helping us improve the site and the customer experience, and I guess finally the business outcome? The fact that I have data in Splunk or data in Hadoop, and I have lots of data sources, is that really helping me drive my business? Is that really helping me understand where I stack up and where I need to focus and how do I improve? And so I think the challenge is that we need to not only have data, but we need to kind of understand the context. How does that compare to normal? And then also drive from that data action. So I have to be able to go from data to actually improving the site. And so this is sort of, the idea here is that you start with a tool, and of course, the tool needs to be accurate, the tool needs to be dependable, it needs to be best of breed or close to it. And of course, we feel like Keynote is that tool, but like I said, a tool is only the starting point. And then, once you have a tool, you start generating data. And in the context of this webinar, maybe that data is alerting. So you start out with measuring a few pages on your site or home pages, and you start to generate alerts. And alerts are useful, certainly as a starting point, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But really what we want to do is move from just alerts, is the site up or down, to insight. What can I derive about the site performance, the experience on the site, the quality of the site, and then from there, that should drive us to customer impacting action. In other words, I need to then take that insight and take action on it. It might be a tactical action. I need to compress a file. I need to look at my third parties. I need to look at this error that's happening. Or it might be strategic action. I need to make sure that the next framework we use is lighter, or that when we integrate this web service, it has a better performance, or we establish SLAs with our providers. But the idea here is that Keynote can be like any other tool and simply just be a tool or just provide alerting. But really, the value is as you move further into this chain. And another way to look at that is, I guess the other question there is, why is this important, right? Why is it important that we move from a tool to performance improvement or performance management? And that's really kind of what the focus here is you might have Keynote now, you might have alarms, but there's so much more that you can do. And so the reason it's important is because your customers are becoming less and less tolerant of failures. I've been at Keynote doing this for 15 years, and I remember the days of dial-up before internet. I also remember when we used to say 8 seconds, right? I mean, that's quite a long time ago, over a decade ago, where we would say that performance, expectations are 8 seconds. And, now I think clearly people are saying 3 seconds, and if you're Google, you're talking about hundreds of milliseconds where they notice customers will be less engaged if the site is slowing. This now is kind of spilling over into the smartphone world as well, where if you have a poor experience on a mobile app, we're hearing that customers will, 20% of them almost will never try that again. And of course, in retail, there's a clear kind of correlation to performance and abandonment. There's been lots of studies done around the relationship between performance and abandonment, and that if as the site slows, you're much less likely to convert. And so performance matters. Not just alerting and alarming is the site up, but performance really, really matters. And it matters even more, like as I said, now on mobile. This chart on the left is showing sort of where we are 2014, 2015, where mobile is really overtaking desktop. We have many, many customers where when you talk to them about their user profile, that they're at 55% with mobile, and then desktop and tablet are sort of the remainder. And that really changes things because on mobile, performance is a lot harder to do well. And even with the sort of advent of the 4G LTE kind of advanced networks, there's still major differences in terms of how to design a mobile optimized site or a mobile optimized app that really works well. And yet the expectation is, I think, very similar to what we experience on desktop. I mean, customers aren't very fair, right? They don't really take into account the fact that there's cell towers and mobile latency and even the fact that weather can affect performance on mobile. They're expecting mobile performance to be similar to what they have on their desktop. And not only that, but the actual makeup of your customers is changing in terms of the millennials who are now very mobile native and are no longer going to sort of accept poor performance on mobile devices. The other reason performance matters is that that you're spending a lot on your digital investments. There's a graphic here that's not building on the right, but performance is important, or understanding kind of the holistic quality of your site or mobile app or mobile website, because you're spending a lot on it, right? I mean, there's a huge amount of investment going into digital. And not only is there huge investment, that most leaders in digital are saying that these initiatives are critical to the overall success of their business. So I remember the days when we talked about in retail, the channel, the online channel being sort of a skunkworks project or sort of a side project, that really all the focus was on brick and mortar. And obviously that's completely changed, right? Not only in terms of e-commerce that are doing pure play online, but even the large brands, they no longer think of retail as sort of a side endeavor. And you would say the same thing about native digital platforms in terms of social media, in terms of news media, in terms of financial services are not native, but you talk to all of those kind of business leaders, and digital is where they're focusing. And so it's really important, again, to make sure that we're understanding how those investments are working. As we invest in in certain technologies and infrastructures and content delivery networks and cloud services, how are those things working for the customer? Because it's no longer just a side project. It's extremely critical to the success, I'm sure, of your business and as well as many of our customers. And then I guess, the last piece, why move from alerting, to performance? So we've talked a little bit about because your customers are very demanding about performance and they will leave your site because, you're making huge investments in digital. Because mobile is sort of changing the game. I think the last area is because complexity has increased so much, right? There's so much more that's happening in terms of what it takes to develop a site, and that's an internal site and an external site. I mean, you can think about all of this in the context of course, customer-facing websites, but it's also in the context of internal sites that your employees are using, right? Whether that be Salesforce or some of the pieces of Dropbox and other pieces, NetSuite. But there's so much more complexity. It used to be that a site was in a data center, all the content was in a server in the data center, and you would access that site via the internet, and it was a very kind of one-to-one relationship. My site, I control 90% of it, and it's on my premises. That no longer exists. Even the most basic sites now, that are not that complex, still have pieces of cloud storage or cloud computing, or certainly third parties, whether those be analytics, personalization, social media, tracking and display ads. But there's a huge amount of third parties, and there's this idea of kind of the no data center anymore. And so all of that, we could go on and on forever about the complexity there, but all of that has created a need to really understand how it all comes together in the browser, how it all comes together in the mobile device, what that looks like for your customer, because no longer can I just look at my data center and have an alarm that says, yes, my data center is up or my web server is up. I really need to understand how does the integration of Facebook and my CDN and the Amazon services on the cloud come together in the browser. And so, I think hopefully you can see why it makes sense that customers that work with Keynote begin with sort of alarming and what I would call operational quality, and then move into performance optimization as well, and then kind of the final step is performance management process. And so that's the life cycle. I had a slide in there that doesn't quite build right in Adobe Connect, but the idea is that we move along that life cycle. So you begin with sort of measuring and alarming and simple dashboards, and then you move into performance optimization, and then hopefully finally you move into performance management process. So you're taking that and actually feeding those optimizations into standards, into testing and dev QA, into sort of a culture shift within the organization. And that might seem challenging. So how do you do that? And we offer a large range of services in my area of the business, again, digital performance insights, that helps our customers do that. I'm certainly not saying that the only way that you do that is by using our services. You certainly can do it on your own, but a lot of customers find value in using our services to kind of get a jump start. And so the services that I want to talk about today, and that's just what we sort of mentioned in the webinar, emails, is the competitive assessment services and the performance optimization services. My team also offers other services that you can see here, but those are the two I want to focus on because I think they're the ones that we've seen have had the biggest success moving customers from sort of a basic understanding of operational quality to really performance optimization. So let's talk first about the competitive products that we offer. And I guess I'll just say that, I think context is extremely important. I have lots of examples of where I will go and talk to leaders within digital organizations, and they will sort of tell me what they think is normal or good about performance. And these are all kind of real interactions that I've had in the last 15 years. But I've had CIOs tell me things like, it's normal to have my page take 6 seconds. That's the best the internet can do. or it's normal that my site has very large slowdowns every day because that's just how the internet works, or performance on mobile at 20 seconds is acceptable. And these are all smart people. They're smart people who have an opinion about how things should perform, or what metric makes the most sense, or how performance management should be done. And what they're missing in kind of that discussion is the context, because once you start to look at other sites in your industry, outside of your industry, you start to really quickly get very clear about what's possible. So no longer am I sort of making up numbers based on my own opinion, but I actually am, I can actually look at data and say, this is what the best-in-class sites are able to achieve. This is where my site is, and this is where I need to go. And it brings clarity to the organization. And so I'll show you an example of some data. This is public data. I'm not sharing any private data here. But this is a study that we do, an example of this, around the auto industry in the U.S. And we do these studies globally as well. And this study is sort of looking at the performance experience of a typical transaction or business path on an auto site. And so it starts at the home page and goes through looking at a vehicle, looking at some photos, looking at vehicle details. It's across 3 screens. And we'll get to this later, but 3 screens is really, really important. In fact, it's even more important with responsive, which might not make sense initially, but 3-screen view is extremely important in understanding where to focus. But this illustrates why context and kind of competitive data is really, really, really useful. So I'm going to pick on Honda. Honda is actually a very good customer of ours. They dominate typically in these kinds of studies. I won't take personal credit for that, but we'll take some credit for. But you'll notice if you're Honda and you're running the digital experience, this data, which shows how I compare to the top sites on desktop, tablet, and smartphone, very quickly would start to focus you on the smartphone. Just this slide alone, I now can understand if I want to invest performance optimization resources, where should I start to invest those? Well, I certainly don't want to invest them on the desktop because I'm the best site there by far. And these metrics are, the values are scores, and we can talk more in the question section if you're curious how we come up with those. But, and I'm really doing pretty well on the tablet. I'm in the top, 3 sites. But man, smartphone, I'm below the top 10 or in that area. And so I can, just from this graph alone, I can start to understand where I need to focus. And no longer is it someone at the organization guessing about, I think we should focus on desktop, I think our desktop site's bad, or whatever. I really get very clear about where I need to focus. And then I can go a level deeper, and this is not Honda data. I've hidden whose data this is. But what I'm showing here, it's probably a little hard to read, but you'll have a copy of this afterwards, is we have hundreds of metrics that we feel are key for performance. And this is showing metrics in the design category where this site, and this is a mobile site, it was their homepage, is outside of industry average. So again, let me show you how to read the graph. The site I'm talking about is showing its metrics on the red bar at the far right. The industry average is the light blue bar, and the best site for that metric is the dark blue bar. And why this is super important is now I have context about the best site, what's possible for that metric, right? Someone out there is actually, in the case of page size, has a home page for mobile that's about 200K, so that's certainly possible in my industry. The industry average for home page is, 1.1 meg, okay, so I kind of know what normal is. And my home page for this site that I will not tell you who it is 3 meg. And not only is it 3 meg, but it's the worst of 23 sites that we measured. That one bar chart has the possibility to open up a very productive business technology discussion around strategy, right? Because now I can go to the CIO and to the head of digital and to the development teams and say, okay, we're so far out of normal. We're the worst of 23 sites in this metric. We're double or triple the industry average, and we're 10x the best site. Actually, it's 20x. Is that intentional? Are we doing something in our strategy around digital that makes that make sense? Or is it something that we need to look at optimizing, right? And those discussions where business and IT, business and development can have those discussions around what is actually normal. If we're outside of normal, have we made a conscious business strategy decision to do that, and is it paying off? And those kind of business trade-off, performance trade-off discussions can be powered by this sort of data. So it's extremely, extremely useful, and you go through and you can see other areas where they're outside, right? The fact that they have more requests, and they have the largest text files on average, and et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that once I get context, it's no longer my opinion. It's no longer, oh, I think we're too slow. I think we have too many JavaScripts. I think we have too many images. It's really hard and fast. Here's what's possible. Here's what's normal. Here's where my site is, and then we can have that discussion. And so just a little bit of detail about a competitive assessment if you wanted to do that with Keynote. And to be clear, you don't have to be a current customer to do these studies. Sometimes we have folks that just do these studies, and of course, if you are a current customer, that helps as well. But competitive assessments like this, you choose the competitors, typically 2 to 10, and you might say, well, I don't have 10 direct competitors, and a lot of times people will choose best-in-class sites that are kind of adjacent. So let's say you're a B2B site, but you're doing, authentication and you're bringing back data. Well, you might compare yourself to a consumer banking site because they do authentication and they bring back data. So you choose, your competitors. You choose your business transaction path, i.e., the most important thing you want to compare. If you're a retailer, that's the search and purchase path. If you're a financial institution, it's the, login, customer servicing path. If you're an insurance company, it's the, find and quote insurance. If you're a travel company, it's the search for travel, book travel. So you choose whatever you think is, makes the most sense in terms of impact. You choose the time, not timer period, the time period. You choose, kind of, do you want to look at this on desktop, tablet, mobile, or mobile app, or all of them? And then we do all the heavy lifting. We execute the test. We do kind of all of the ranking and scoring, and we provide the context, and then also give you lots of recommendations for improvement. A typical study like this is, hundreds of slides of detail and recommendations, and, it costs typically about 25,000. I put it in euros. I know there might be folks that are looking at it in pounds too, but and it's 4 to 6 weeks. And this is extremely powerful. I've seen these kinds of studies really kick off performance optimization in an organization that's lasted for years. So in other words, start a process where people start to get serious about performance, start to talk about performance, and then start to put plans in place to actually address it. So it's something certainly to consider. The value outcomes, I think I've talked a lot about these already, but you get clear data about what your goals and targets are and what's achievable. So if you have someone in the organization that says, I think the search page on lodging, on a lodging site or on a travel site should be 1 second, you would know from this study that that's probably not achievable, right? Because even the fastest sites are 3 or 4 seconds. So you get some data about what's achievable, where your goals should be. You can have an objective, data-driven discussion about where you are and why you're there. It doesn't mean it's not bad if you're not the top site, because there might be a business reason that you've chosen a different strategy around content or around immersive experience. But it's good to have that discussion. You identify hotspots or areas of your site where you're outside of normal. So that kind of data map where I have hundreds of data points of different types of values that affect performance, and then I can show you where you're the most outside of normal. Really useful to kind of focus the team up. Drive tactical strategic changes or investments, and then track this over time. Most customers don't do these studies just once a year and then never do them again. They're typically doing them twice a year or maybe 4 times a year. So they're able to sort of see changes in their industry as well as changes in their site as they're making improvements. So at the end, again, if you have questions about any of these, we can sort of talk through those, or you of course, reach out to us directly, and I'll have my contact information up at the end. So that's the kind of competitive study, and again, very, very useful. The second sort of thing I'll talk about is really in the performance optimization area, and I like to talk about focusing on what matters. I talk to many of our clients and customers, and what they tell me is that they're constantly being bombarded with internal and external ideas about where they should spend their time and money to improve the site. So you have vendors that will come in and say, if you just use my CDN, you will be so much faster. Or if you just buy my SAN storage, or you just switch to my cloud, or you just use my optimization tool, that you'll be so much better. And then internally, I think you have people who are kind of pointing fingers, and this graph I think illustrates some of that. They might be looking and saying, well, if our network was just better, those network teams were just better, our site would be better. Or if the server teams are saying, oh, if the marketing people just didn't put all that large content on the site would be better. And the marketing people are saying, well, it's really the fact that we've outsourced our application coding, and those guys don't know what they're doing. And so there's all of this confusion around where should I really focus. And at the same time, we all have limited resources, both financial resources in terms of investment, but also time. We can't focus on everything at once. And so a lot of customers I work with, before we work with them, are kind of running around trying to focus on everything, or just sort of in a state of they're paralyzed because they don't know they don't know where to focus, so they don't do anything. And what we're trying to do in our practice is we understand that the customer, when they come to the site, they don't know all of the things that are happening behind the scenes that are on this graph. And there's probably 100 more I could add, right? But most customers have no understanding, thankfully probably, of hosting and cloud services and server infrastructure and content delivery and tracking analytics and web services, et cetera. They don't understand any of that. All they understand is I want to have a fast, reliable experience. I want to have a fast, reliable experience. I want to engage with your content. I want to buy something. I want to look at something. I want to research something. I want to be immersed in an experience. They just want a good experience. And what we know is that behind the scenes, all of these things have to work together to provide a good experience. And if any of them are out of balance or unhealthy, then the experience will suffer. And so this is the sort of thing that we do in the performance optimization product, is really help customers get very clear about where the issues are and where they need to focus. And by the way, we don't care that some teams don't like other teams. We don't have a political piece to sort of figure out. We're objective, and we're just going to come in and say, if you want to improve the experience, don't buy that new CDN. Don't spend that money on new cloud services. Focus on the third parties, or focus on the back end systems. We help kind of cut through that noise. And so how do we do that? The most popular product that I have in my portfolio, and there's hundreds of Keynote customers in this product and growing 20% a year, is the Insight service. And so let me explain kind of how the Insight service works at a high level. But first, let me kind of set the background for why this product began about 6 years ago. What we were finding 6 or 7 years ago is that complexity was really starting to increase. Back then it was, if you remember these terms, Web 2.0, Flash was kind of new, CDNs were kind of beginning to take off, and there was a lot of complexity. And of course, also at that time, the digital channel was becoming more and more important. And so we had customers say, I don't want to just use Keynote to alarm me. I really want to drive performance optimization. And so we came up with this service that helps with that. But the other thing we were hearing from clients is, I don't have time, nor do I have the staff to become a Keynote expert. I don't want to manage your tool day to day. I just want to take the outputs, the data, the insights from your tool and use those, but I don't want to actually be a Keynote expert. I don't want to script. I don't want to have things, have to manage scripts. I don't want to have to, be the expert in understanding the data. I just really want to kind of get the outcomes. And so that sort of was the genesis of the Insight service, and that, as I said, started about 6 years ago. And it has these 5 components, and I'll go through each of them, so I won't spend much more time on this slide. But the 5 components sort of work together and are part of the service, going forward. The first is, if you're an Insight customer, and typically you're signing up for this for a year. If you're an Insight customer, your consultant will help you not only design the right set of measurements, but maintain those over the year. And so there's two pieces there, right? One is we want to make sure that what we're measuring is actually what we should be measuring. And so a lot of times that's comparing, your analytics so that we can help design measurement paths that actually match your top business paths. It's choosing the right browser, the right locations, the right frequencies, depending on how you're using the data, mobile device, et cetera. And so it's working with you as a customer, and that could be an existing customer, and that's sort of a review of the existing measurements, or a new customer. It's working with you to define how you should measure and what you should measure, because we're working with hundreds, and actually over a year, thousands of customers. So we have a good context for what's normal in retail or financial services or travel or B2B, et cetera. But then the other piece is that we actually set up all those measurements for you. So we're doing all the scripting, and then we're managing those ongoing. And if you've ever managed synthetic measurement, one of the biggest challenges is the site will change slightly, and the measurement will break. And then, someone has to go in and fix it. And then, maybe that person's on vacation, and that's taken a very long time to fix or something. It can be minor changes to the site, right? It could be on a retail site, a stock issue. It could be on a financial services site that there's some new pop-up that's coming up that's saying, go to paperless statements or something. So we handle all of that for you. The team actually is actively looking at your measurements every day, and if there is a change or a break, we will fix the measurement proactively. We will clean out the bad data. We call that exclusions. And we will actually then, make sure that the data is clean. And this is really, really important, right? Good data into the system is required if you want good insights and action out. And so this is why we manage the entire service for our customers. And when I tell customers this who have been struggling with scripting or struggling with maintenance, they're extremely excited just about this one part of the service because they no longer have to do that. So then second, once we have the measurements running, the second part of Insights is that we provide some daily KPIs, some key performance indicators in an automated report. And this report is actually undergoing a redesign this year. But there's three sections. There's performance, there's availability, and page construction. And it shows kind of a long-term view and a short-term view, 4 weeks of trend data and then 7 days of detailed data. And you can't really see this here probably, but there's colors that are being highlighted based on thresholds in the report. And what this is hoping to do, and does I think a very good job of it, is it's providing folks who would probably never get into the Keynote dashboard a high-level view of how the site's performing. So this report might go to hundreds of people in an organization. 90 of them might not have any view of Keynote, not know how to even get into the tool, but they're getting the Keynote data. And so it's a communication tool for, is the site okay? How healthy is the site? How have things changed? Are we having issues on any particular pages or certain types of metrics? So this report goes out to a large audience, and it really helps communicate the data to a large audience. But the obvious question then is, okay, if I get this report it's emailed in my email box, and I see something is red, why? Why is it red? Should I be concerned? Should I, is it something that changed on the site and is still happening, or was it a minor issue maybe from one location in Europe or something? And so we also provide, as part of the Insight service, a daily triage where we are looking at those reports, just like you are, and actually providing feedback about how you can improve. And so we're looking and saying, hey, this is why this went red yesterday. It's because a third party spiked for 2 hours and the impact to your clients was minimal. Or maybe it's where it read because your marketing team pushed some new images and they're very large and they're not optimized, and that's why it's slowing down. So we're providing that triage. It doesn't replace operational alarming. You still have access to alarms. You still have dashboards. We're not 24/7, so we're not replacing your NOC or your data center folks, but it helps kind of keep an eye on the site for all of us who are very busy to make sure that if something is changing in a negative way, that you're aware of it. The third or fourth component of the service is an analysis report. We call that the Insight report. And this is where we're getting to, if you remember that other graph I showed you, where we have all these variables and there's all this confusion about where do I need to focus, this report is where we start to unpack or kind of just dive into those details. So every month we're going to send and then discuss with you on a call, where is the site, and that includes trend data. How is the site trending over time? It includes some kind of detailed health data, which I'll talk about in a second, error data, spikes. It's extremely comprehensive review of the previous month. And the goal of that is to take the data and put it in a format that everyone can understand, that could be distributed. Certain slides could be distributed to business leaders or digital leaders, and also have a discussion around the site. And that's a big part of it, is not just the report, but having that call where we have business development, operations, et cetera, in there together, talking about performance, talking about the strategy, talking about changes on the site that month. And extremely, extremely useful. I want to show you, and this is an image, so it's kind of not the best resolution, but I want to show you what we're doing in this product. I'm really excited about. This is the first kind of massive change we've done in the product in 6 years, and it's launching this quarter. What we heard from customers was, even if I am not buying a competitive study, I'm only buying insights. And remember, insights is about your site, and it's about the ongoing performance of your site. But even if I'm not buying competitive data, I really wish that you would, Keynote, help me understand how I am comparing to the rest of the internet, right? How does my site or my homepage compare to the rest of the internet in the key areas that you think matter, like performance or render or design or third party? And we started thinking about that, and we said, well, Keynote's the largest global synthetic vendor in the world. I guess that's the same thing. I said global. So we're the largest synthetic measurement vendor in the world. We literally have data on 3,000 or 4,000 sites every day. Something like 100 million data points, or maybe more than that, a day are being collected. And so we can use that data to actually understand what is typical, what is normal, what is best, and where are you. And this is not about your competitors per se. It's sort of about the normal internet or the normal web, for mobile web or whatever. But it's adding context. And so the idea of this is that I can quickly look across my business path that I'm measuring. In this case, it's a retailer who's looking at kind of going through a product and then a store locate. And I can see, man, I really have some issues on the home page. And the biggest issues are in the area of design, because I have the lowest score there, 21. And also in third party. And then on the product page, wow, design is also really low. And from there, then the report would unpack, what does that really mean? It means that I have too many CSSs and too many JavaScripts and too many third parties, et cetera, whatever. But I could take this one slide and show it to an executive and say, this is our score for the month based on context, right? This is not just our site and Keynote's opinion, even though we feel like we're pretty smart and we have good people that have good opinions, but this is actually real data comparing us to thousands of other sites, and here's where we're outside of normal, and then here's Keynote's recommendations about how to improve. So this sort of scoring context is going to be rolled out to all the insights in this quarter, so we're in Q2. And I think it's going to be really, really useful. All of the other pieces that have always been there in terms of operational drill downs and looking at performance over time and performance by location and all of that will still be there. But the goal is to make this kind of more context-driven and more concise. And then the last piece of insights is, we don't view insights as just a tool or a service, right? It's really a relationship. So what that means is that you're paired up, if you become an Insights customer, you're paired up with a consultant on my team that are based in your region. So we have consultants in Europe, in the US, et cetera. And they are working with maybe 10 other clients, 9 other clients, which means they're able to give you a lot of personal attention. And so they're there if you need to ask them questions, if you need training, if you want to set up a temporary measurement and get some analysis. We don't charge by hour. We don't limit the engagement that you can have with your consultant. So they become part of your team. They learn your business. They learn your challenges. They can tailor the monthly analysis based on what you're focused on. They become kind of an extension of the team. And that's really, really powerful. I have clients who, when we've had to shuffle consultants because of workload, they will get very upset and say things like, oh, don't take away this person because, they're great. They're part of our team. And so the relationship that's developed with that, resource over the 12 months is extremely, extremely powerful. I'm going to go back a few slides just to sort of summarize again. This is the Insight service. It's a 12-month performance management service that includes, measuring the site and managing those measurements, the daily report, KPIs, the daily triage and feedback, the monthly analysis now with kind of context scoring, and then expertise on demand or your consultant relationship. And so, this is, again, something that's probably the most popular service the most popular service that I offer and fits kind of across the spectrum of clients. It can be smaller clients, larger clients. We have some that are, global enterprises that are obviously huge, but there's kind of across the spectrum. And of course, if you're interested in that, we can actually do free trials and POCs of that service. I promise I'm almost done talking. The last thing I'll say is we have a similar approach for assessment-based solutions. So if you're not willing to commit and don't want to commit to a 12-month relationship, you can actually do sort of a similar sort of assessment, whether that be on your site, production site, your site before it launches, your CDN, whatever. You can do it, your mobile site, responsive. You can do an assessment, that's more of a point-in-time, engagement. So we would take the same approach of setting up the right measurements, collecting data for 2 to 4 weeks, and then doing an analysis. We would take that same approach, but it's only a one-time engagement. And sometimes it's a good way to start because you might feel like I really need help, but I don't necessarily have the budget this year for a 12-month Insight relationship. But I would like to have, an assessment to kick off our development improvement, performance improvement process. Or we're launching a new site and I really want to get someone to look at it before we launch, and we can certainly do that. Or, we've launched responsive, but no one's ever done an assessment across the 3 screens of is responsive actually working, and so we can do that as well. So just to recap, the 3 areas of service I talked about today are competitive assessments, insights, and then kind of point-in-time performance optimization assessments. And all of those are kind of at your disposal as a Keynote client or potential Keynote client. Obviously, there are additional service costs to what you're currently spending on measurements, but we can kind of scale those up or down based on your budget, based on the timelines, et cetera. So I always like to talk not just about Keynote, but just also about what we're seeing in the industry. So I have 2 slides, and I promise these are the last slides, about trends and best practices. So what are we seeing? And the reason I think we have a unique perspective is we look across thousands of sites on a yearly basis. We have hundreds and hundreds of people in the Insight service, but we're doing competitive studies for hundreds more and assessments for hundreds more. And so I get to see sites globally, and it's quite interesting to sort of see the trends that emerge. And so some trends I'll just say, and maybe you would agree with some of these, but, responsive design is really not responsive. So, what we find is that there's a huge issue with performance of responsive sites on smartphone. And, the vision of responsive is one code base, easier maintenance, everything will just work across any screen. And the reality is that performance doesn't typically work very well on smartphone. And the reason is because the core site is not optimized. So if you have a very clunky desktop site and you make it responsive, you will have a very, very clunky, slow, horrible experience on smartphone. We've done lots of work with clients where they did not know that their smartphone site was taking 20, 30 seconds a page, which is clearly not acceptable. So there's lots of things that I think are coming out and trends around getting very serious about how do we optimize responsive, and maybe it's not pure responsive, it's some adaptive, it's some server side, there's other things you can do in the responsive space. Some other trends is, there's no single metric. It used to be that clients would kind of pick a metric for performance and track it up to their executives, but what we realize, is no metric is the single metric. It's not on load only, or it's not first paint only, or it's not end-to-end only, or availability only. It's a combination of metrics that really kind of flesh out the performance experience. And so we're working with clients more and more to try to get the right metrics, that makes sense for their business and their design, that will really communicate to the larger audience how things are working. More and more third parties, that's not stopping. So this trend about, third parties are an issue on the internet. And again, when we talk about third parties, we mean analytics tools, social media integrations, media tracking, personalization integrations. You can go on and on. They're not going away, and unfortunately, and the advent of container tags, or tag management systems, is only adding to the ability for the business to put on more and more third parties without a lot of testing. And so there's more and more issues around third parties. I can't tell you the number of sites that I've worked with that their biggest single issue is third-party tags. And that's really a cheap thing to solve, a free thing to solve by removing them almost, but not all these other things that we think about, but really third parties. Errors still matter. I think we think in 2015 sometimes that we've solved the issue of kind of stability, that, cloud is stable, back-end infrastructure, frameworks are stable, but we still see lots and lots of errors, and errors are only becoming more prevalent because of the complexity between systems that maybe sort of, clouds or obfuscates the issue. So you have a CDN and a third party and a cloud and an origin, and all of those can trigger errors between each other that are hidden, that are not obvious, but are obvious in the browser. And so, errors still really do matter. Personalization is causing lots of challenges. More and more people are going to personalization or test and target, A/B testing, which is okay, but it makes things less cacheable. It relies on third-party vendors, especially for personalization, that have to be very high in the page load. And so that causes a lot of problems. And then, more and more, I said, people need to be looking across three screens. We're seeing that people are starting to realize my consumers, my customers are no longer a single screen, right? They're moving across screens, even in a purchase process or a research process. They might be on their tablet at home and then back to their desktop at work and then on their smartphone as they're out and about. And I need to really understand the experience across all three of those screens. And last slide before we get to questions is, what are some best practices, right? I have talked for an hour just about best practices, but some quick things as you think about if you're a Keynote customer and you're collecting data on your site, set the right targets. These targets are for desktop. They're actually going to be very similar for LTE and 4G smartphone. Maybe a little bit, add 50% to them for those. But, begin to render your page in half a second. It's a key metric for customers is how quickly do I start to get content. Hit the onload in a second and a half, 2 seconds to key visual content above the fold, and then, 2 to 3 seconds end to end. End to end, I think, matters less and less depending on the environment. Prune and place your third parties. I work with so many clients where we'll tell them all of the third parties that are on their site, and they'll look at me and sort of say, huh? We don't know about these, or why are these here, or where are these coming from, or this was on the site from a campaign that we ran 6 months ago. So there's a need to prune consistently, removing third parties that are no longer in play, and then obviously place them correctly. For us, correctly means after your content, after the onload event. Limit all synchronous calls. The biggest killer for performance, this is not new, but this is sort of consistent across the last 15 years, is synchronous calls. And there's lots of things that are synchronous: redirects, third parties, applications, JavaScript in some cases, though less and less. And really needing to understand what is synchronous and what is not, I think, is super important. Focus on the basics. I say basics in quotes because these are best practices that have been out on the internet in performance circles for 10 years, and yet people avoid them, ignore them, don't implement them. So combining CSS, JavaScript, looking at image and file size, looking at compression, persistent connections. I could go on and on, but many sites still do not follow these basic best practices, and then they wonder why performance is not optimal. And then, finally, and I guess as a parting comment, is measure, and measure again, right? All of this is good in theory, but if you don't have data that you can trust, that's accurately tracking improvements over time, changes over time, none of this really matters. You need that tool and data to fuel the insight and kind of action, as we talked about. And so you have to keep measuring. You have to measure the right way with the right frequencies outside on the internet. there's a lot that really matters around measurement, and so that's the other best practice is, don't just use web page test, one data point or something, or your local Google Chrome developer tool, to measure your site. You really need to collect thousands and thousands of data points so that you can understand performance at a larger scale. So hopefully that was useful. The file is available for download, and I think Monique just posted that. Thank you. And I think we'll also be able to send out the recording if there's interest in sort of passing this around. I'm available if you need to get me at any time to talk about any of this or anything related to synthetic monitoring, performance management. I love to talk about that stuff. I'm available here. And then in the last 7 minutes, we'll do some questions. So I see a few questions here. Let me. The first one was a good question. Can Keynote clients with private agents purchase insights? So let me just kind of say about private agents for those of you that don't know what that means. Private agents are basically Keynote measurement devices that are within your data center. Now, that's the most typical use case, right, is I want to measure within my data center so that I don't have to worry about the influence of the internet, or I want to measure, intranet sites or internal sites that I can only access from inside my network. And the answer is yes, of course. So the same sort of services that we offer around, measurement and analysis could be done with a private agent. The only caveat there is the measurement management, which is, about the scripting and kind of keeping things up to date. We would have to have access to your internal network if those sites are only internal to do that scripting. If that wasn't important to you, the rest of the services certainly could apply, but there's no reason that you can't use it for private agents. Second question is it really a solution covering third-party scripts, how them loaded asynchronously? Yeah, great question. So I love what third-party vendors say about asynchronous, right? You talk to any third-party vendor and you ask them, are your scripts asynchronous? And they will say yes. And I will tell you that 90, 80, maybe 80% of the time, they're not telling the truth. So number one is you have to first validate with real measurement, is the solution actually asynchronous, right? Because most of the time when they tell you it's asynchronous, they're actually not aware that it's actually blocking. So I think that's a big one. First of all, is validate that it actually is asynchronous. Secondly, yeah, I mean, even asynchronous calls have the ability to tie up browser threads or to kill the browser CPU if they're very slow. I mean, they're much less risky than synchronous calls, but they do have the ability to have kind of bad results. I still think with asynchronous or synchronous, all third parties should be loaded after onload, right? There's really very little reason, unless your third party is actually rewriting the page, i.e. personalization or mBox kind of A/B testing, there's almost no reason to have that third party before your content. They like to have it up high because they want to make sure that they get the track or that it's integrated, et cetera. But if the trade-off is I miss some analytic, but I put the third party lower on the page and there's no risk, then I think most customers would say I'd rather have a good experience than you capture analytics about my experience. So I think the key still is moving it down, in terms of how we look at third parties. So another question is, you talked about responsive. What are you really finding in terms of responsive and performance? And I guess, just to expand on that comment about responsive, I think the biggest issue is that we're not taking into account as we look at responsive the impact of latency over the cellular networks. So even though 4G and LTE is much, much faster in terms of bandwidth than 3G, the latency profile hasn't changed that significantly. And so there is still a much higher latency going from my cell phone through the air to a tower, that tower to a backhaul, connection through the cell connect carrier, to the internet. There's a lot more latency there. And so the idea that we can take a site that maybe is not optimized, that has, multiple megabytes of content, 60, 70, 80 assets, and we can take that and shove it over that higher latency connection and have it work well, I think is just a fallacy. And so, what I've heard, the best thing I've heard about responsive is it works well if your desktop site is highly optimized. So you almost have to start with mobile first, and people say mobile first a lot, but they don't really apply that to performance. But you have to really start with a very optimized site for it to work very, very well. Other question, there was a question about, in our assessment products, are you looking at the back-end code or SQL calls? And that's a good question. I mean, a lot of what I've been talking about, I should have been clearer, is all from outside in, right? We're all using measurement technology that we can, collect data from out on the internet, or in the case of private agent, et cetera. And so for us, we can tell a lot about performance of the CDNs, the third parties, the back-end systems, the content delivery, CMSs, et cetera. But when it gets to kind of a particular back-end call that's slow, we obviously don't have visibility currently into the back-end systems. That's changing somewhat with the Dynatrace piece that we'll be adding. But so we rely on our customers to sort of have the skill set to then diagnose that particular issue. So it's we believe that our value is helping cut through the hundreds and hundreds of variables and help you focus on the right things, but not necessarily kind of back end. We're not coming on site and optimizing your back end code. How can Keynote measure performance loss because of proxies, firewalls? So good question. I mean, how detailed can we get about performance as we look at firewalls, et cetera? It really depends, right? I mean, I would say in our experience, most consumer-facing sites, that's not a big issue, right? Firewall technology. But if you're talking about kind of B2B sites or things like that, proxies and how people are actually connecting to the internet, that makes a big deal. The best way that I would probably measure that experience is we would suggest our real user monitoring tag. So that tag would actually sit on your website, and then we could see the experience of various populations of users and try to understand, are there certain populations of users behind certain proxies, in certain geographies, in certain regional offices, if this is a B2B site, that really are having a worse experience than others. And then you could very quickly pinpoint, well, we know that normal performance is this, but this regional office or this pod of users is much worse. It's outside of normal, and then that would probably point to some sort of network configuration or proxy configuration or something like that. So depending on if that's the gist of your question, you can certainly email me. We're almost out of time. But we could do something with our real user monitoring tag in conjunction with our synthetic monitoring solution. So thank you all for your time today. Unfortunately, we're out of time for additional questions. My email is on the screen. If you need to get in contact with me about any of this, please feel free. I'm always on my email. And again, thanks for the time today. I hope it was useful. And we will see you on the next Keynote webinar.